So why is someone allowed to stay in the UK if they've committed a crime that warrants 16 years imprisonment?
Well, you have to understand the development of the law over the last 2 decades to really understand why he's been allowed to stay here. So the starting point is the 2007 Act, the Borders Act, which says that anyone convicted of an offence which carries 12 months or more imprisonment must be deported. So that's anyone who commits that. Now, the courts then looked at the individual's private and family life in deciding, balancing the rights of an individual against the rights of the state. In 2012, the immigration rules were amended to define what it means to have family or private life. And there's 3 categories. Anyone who's been sentenced to more than 4 years, anyone who's been sentenced to 1 to 4 years, anyone who hasn't gone to prison, but their offending has caused serious harm. Now, the reason this chap wasn't, and I've told you all that, because the reason this chap hasn't been deported, he's committed an offence which carried more than 4 years. So it means that the public right to deport him outweighs his private and family life. But what the court, and this is Strasbourg coming into this, European courts, what they've done is said there must be, if there's some compelling reason as to why he shouldn't be deported, then his rights outweigh the strong public rights for deportation. And the things they look at is the nature and seriousness of the offence, when he last committed the offence, the relationships he has with settled people and children, whether his wife knew about his criminal behaviour before she got involved with him. So they go through all the list of criteria. In this instance, the courts decided there are compelling reasons as to why he shouldn't be deported.
But at what point, if you've been in prison for 16 years, this is what people can't seem to get their head around, should we have a blanket rule that if the crime is serious enough, that actually you forgo your right to a family life if you were not born in the United Kingdom? If you were not born here, then you forgo your right to a family life if a crime is of a certain threshold. And it doesn't matter what it is about your human rights. The seriousness of your crime usurps your human rights, because that is what a lot of people seem to think about this. And I get that view. I completely understand that view.
No, I understand that. I understand the public's frustration. However, the European Convention on Human Rights cuts across every area of law. And when you're deporting somebody or giving a notice to deport, that individual has a right under that convention to invoke his rights to private and family rights. And those rights are not just an individual's rights, the composite right of the whole family. So the courts look at the right of the children, grandchildren, the wife. Would it be unjustifiably harsh, for example, for them to have to go and live in Turkey? Are there compelling reasons as to why his rights and the rights of the family should outweigh the public's rights? That's what the courts have to, that's the balancing exercise they have to do.
But a lot of people would argue that okay, well, if you don't want to have to go through any of those issues, then don't become a drug dealer. That means that you are going to be imprisoned for 16 years, and therefore the problem is then solved. You don't have to go through any of this if you didn't become a drug dealer, but you chose to become a drug dealer, and by choosing to, I just wonder, I mean, I understand what you're saying about the mechanics of it and how the decision comes about, but isn't this all just fueling an argument to say that maybe we need our own Bill of Rights to say, look, I'm sorry, that you committing that crime means that you no longer have the right to argue for a family life. And I'm sorry if it's hard for your family to have to go to Turkey to see you, or hard for them that they might not get to see you, but that's happened because you're a drug dealer. That's not happened because of the state. That's not happened because of anyone else. That's happened because of the actions of the individual whose human rights you're trying to take into account.
No, Augustine, would you like me to speak not as a lawyer, but as a father and a husband?
No, I mean,
I sympathise with you. Look, I've got children. Do I want them walking the streets with a man like this? I don't at all. But we mustn't blame the courts or the judges. That's the mistake. If we don't like the convention, then vote for a party that wants to take us out. That's the public's right to do that. But as the law stands today, the courts will look at the family as a whole and look at that criteria set by Strasbourg. It's the European courts which have set this criteria. And
but isn't one of the articles, though, within that, the seriousness of the crime? I mean, you alluded to that as well. So again, a lot of people would wonder how, on balance, a crime that warrants a 16-year sentence, why that wasn't deemed severe enough. So why do you think, in your legal opinion, a crime of that seriousness hasn't warranted it outweighing the court thinking that the human rights need to be respected?
I think, looking at this judgment, I've had a look at the judgment. I think what the courts are looking at is when the last offence was committed, which was back in 2014. One has to remember it's been 10 years since he committed an offence. A lot of people might say, well, he's not been caught. Well, there's no evidence before the court of that fact. So that's just one of the factors. And also, as well as serious, as I said, the time elapsed since that offence was committed is something the courts will weigh in the balance. And that's just one of 6 factors. The other factors being his relationships, strength of the family ties, children. And another important factor is whether the spouse knew of his criminal behaviour before she entered that family unit, and they had a bond together as a family unit.
Just one final question, which is interesting to me on this. We talk about it being about his right to a family life. Well, one of the things that actually happened was that whilst he was back in Turkey, he actually had an affair and ended up marrying someone whom he then met in Turkey. Does that actually, the tribunal heard he had an extramarital affair in Turkey with a woman he later married. Does your conduct within your family ever then influence the court in deciding, so therefore if you've had an affair, if you've been a bit of a rogue, will the court then say, well, actually, hang on, you haven't led a particularly exemplary family life from a moral perspective, so therefore you can't now argue for that family life?
Well, the court will look at the relationship with his spouse. That's what they're looking at. If she'd have said, look, I'm not accepting that, I'm breaking now my ties to you, that would have been a factor. But my understanding is, from the judgment, she hasn't done that. She stood by him and supported him throughout. But you see, the problem is when someone commits an offence, it takes years for that deportation process to be fulfilled. And what happens is, in that period, people establish relationships. And that's an issue. If we had a system which was much quicker, and we're able to deport people much quicker, those who commit serious criminal offences, they wouldn't have time to establish those family ties. Quite often, I'm afraid, it takes such a long time that they have years in which to live here and establish those ties. So I think that's something that the courts need to look at, how quickly they deal with these matters.
OK, good to talk to you. Thank you for getting us into the nuts and bolts of how